Homeowners associations, commonly referred to as HOAs, play a significant role in the governance of many residential communities across the United States. These organizations are typically created by developers to manage and maintain the common areas of a neighborhood, ensuring a certain standard of living for residents. When you move into such a community, you often encounter an array of rules and regulations designed to promote aesthetic harmony, safety, and property values. While many appreciate the order that an HOA can bring, others find themselves at odds with its stringent policies. At its core, an HOA is a collective of homeowners who come together to make decisions about the property and amenities shared by the community. This includes overseeing landscaping, maintenance of community facilities like pools or parks, and enforcing community standards through established guidelines. These guidelines can cover everything from architectural styles and exterior paint colors to pet ownership rules, intended to preserve the overall appearance and appeal of the neighborhood. Membership in an HOA is generally mandatory upon purchasing property within its jurisdiction. Homeowners are usually required to pay monthly or annual dues, which fund the association's activities and upkeep of common areas. In exchange, residents benefit from well-maintained environments that can enhance property values over time. However, this system can also breed conflict when homeowners feel that rules are overly restrictive or unfairly enforced. Within this structure lies both power and responsibility. The HOA board typically consists of elected homeowners who manage day-to-day operations, make policy decisions, and enforce rules. They hold monthly meetings where they discuss ongoing issues and expenses, while providing a platform for residents to voice their concerns or suggestions. While these gatherings can foster community spirit, they can also become contentious when individuals disagree with board actions. Unfortunately, conflicts often arise when residents feel that the HOA is overstepping its bounds or applying regulations arbitrarily. In my case, I found myself embroiled in one such controversy after moving into a neighborhood governed by an HOA despite not being an official member myself. As I settled into my new home with my beloved dog, I unwittingly became entangled in a web of HOA regulations regarding pet ownership that I was unaware existed. The atmosphere shifted dramatically when I received notice from the association informing me of their strict policies against dogs in the community, a rule aimed at maintaining cleanliness and tranquility among homeowners. While having pets is a common aspect of life for many households, it became apparent that this particular association had adopted an exceptionally rigid stance on canine companions. Not only did I receive a ban notification regarding my dog's presence in the neighborhood, but I also faced extraordinary fines totaling over $100, a staggering amount for someone who believed they were operating well within their rights as an outsider to the HOA. This situation propelled me into a confrontation with an organization that seemingly had unchecked authority over residents' lifestyles. The foundation upon which HOAs operate can often lead to misunderstandings about what constitutes fair play between associations and homeowners. While some individuals might be grateful for the regulations that maintain order and aesthetics within their environment, others may feel victimized by arbitrary restrictions imposed on them without proper representation or recourse. As I began digging deeper into the nature of HOAs, clarity on their roles and responsibilities, I found myself at a crossroads between adhering to what appeared to be draconian measures imposed by the HOA and advocating for my rights as a homeowner who wasn't even officially part of their ranks. This conflict has highlighted not only my struggle but also raised broader questions about how power dynamics function within residential associations. Throughout this journey of navigating HOA rules while facing significant financial penalties for owning a dog, layered complexities have emerged regarding individual freedoms versus collective governance. It is crucial to explore these tensions more thoroughly as we examine how HOAs can impact homeowners' lives in unexpected ways, often leading them down paths fraught with frustration and resentment. In unraveling this story further, it becomes evident that understanding the inner workings of HOAs is essential, not just for those who live within their confines but also for those contemplating life in communities governed by such organizations. The first signs of conflict appeared shortly after I moved into the neighborhood with my dog, a jovial Labrador mix named Max. The excitement of settling into my new home was quickly overshadowed by an unexpected encounter with the Homeowners Association, HOA, which dictated rules that I had, until that point, paid little attention to. As I walked Max through the neighborhood, I noticed the pristine lawns, carefully curated landscapes, and families enjoying their evening strolls. Yet, beneath this picture-perfect facade lay a web of regulations that could turn life upside down for unwary residents like myself. It all began one sunny afternoon when I received a letter from the HOA. The envelope was formal, adorned with the association's logo, and my heart sank as soon as I saw it. Inside was a notification stating that dogs were strictly prohibited within the community. The letter outlined the reasoning behind this ban: preserving cleanliness, maintaining peace, and ensuring that every resident enjoyed their property without disturbance or mess. It felt surreal. Here I was, a responsible dog owner who had always cleaned up after Max, yet I stood to be penalized by an organization that had not properly communicated such rules upon my move-in. The situation escalated quickly. Shortly after receiving the initial notification, I found myself facing fines that piled up to an absurd total of over one. Each infraction seemed arbitrary, as if the HOA was wielding its power indiscriminately against an easy target. The first fine arrived a week after the notice, citing my dog's presence in the neighborhood as a violation of HOA policy. In disbelief, I read and reread the document, attempting to find any semblance of fairness in a process that seemed anything but just. Despite my protests that I wasn't even officially part of the HOA, having bought my home directly from a developer, I was told that all residents of the community were subject to its rules regardless of membership status. This candid admission ignited my frustration and drove home the reality of my precarious situation. How could they impose such significant penalties on someone who had simply sought a peaceful life in a new home? Recurring fines emerged like clockwork. Each violation seemed to serve as both punishment and warning, a reminder of the HOA's authority and willingness to enforce its rules with relentless vigor. Within just a few weeks, I found myself not only battling against these absurd fines, but also dealing with an increasingly hostile atmosphere among some neighbors who sided with the HOA's rigid stance on dog ownership. It was as if they viewed me as an intruder in their tightly controlled environment. Responses varied from sympathy to judgment. Some neighbors expressed support for my predicament, while others quietly aligned themselves with the HOA's regulations, viewing them as necessary for maintaining their way of life. Conversations that were once casual now felt heavy with tension whenever Max and I made an appearance. It became clear that standing up against the HOA would not only impact my financial situation, but also alter my relationship with my new community. Trying to understand how to navigate this labyrinthine system became my new mission. Researching other homeowners' battles with their associations revealed tales of similar disputes, but also illuminated potential paths forward. It became apparent that many residents felt trapped by what they considered overreach from their HOAs. My situation was certainly not unique. The mounting fines became less about the money and more about principles. It was no longer just about Max being barred from enjoying our neighborhood, but rather about confronting an organization that wielded considerable influence over residents' lives without proper accountability. My experiences raised profound questions about fairness, representation, and community governance. As tensions grew around me and fines continued to accumulate, it was evident that addressing these issues required more than just avoiding walks with Max or staying inside during HOA patrol. It called for advocacy, not just for myself, but for anyone caught in similar binds where rules overshadowed personal freedoms and common sense. In dissecting this conflict further, it became crucial to engage with both the HOA processes and fellow residents who may feel similarly trapped by their governing policies. Understanding the balance between community standards and individual rights is essential in navigating the often challenging dynamics present in neighborhoods controlled by HOA. Thus began my journey toward reclaiming not only my voice but also that of countless other residents who may have felt powerless against oppressive regulation. Max entered my life during a transitional phase that felt both exhilarating and daunting. I had been searching for companionship in the wake of a significant life change, and adopting a dog seemed like the perfect solution to bring joy and purpose into my home. Max was not just any dog. He was a Labrador mix, approximately 2 years old, with a sunny disposition and an infectious spirit that immediately captured my heart. His fur glistened like polished gold in the sunlight, and his tail wagged with the kind of energy that could lift the heaviest of moods. When I decided to adopt him from a local shelter, I was met with an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The staff informed me that Max had been rescued from an unfortunate situation, but was remarkably adaptable and friendly. They described him as gentle with children and sociable with other dogs, always eager for playtime and affection. These traits made him seem like the ideal companion, not just for leisurely walks, but also for those quiet moments at home when comfort was needed most. While my bond with Max grew stronger day by day, I remained blissfully unaware of how his presence would entwine with my unexpected conflict with the HOA. In those initial weeks together, he provided me solace and joy, happily exploring our new surroundings, as if he were born to run free amid the beautifully manicured lawns and picturesque settings of our neighborhood. Each afternoon brought new adventures as we traversed the local parks, greeted neighbors, and basked under the warmth of the sun. However, it wasn't long before I started noticing some subtle signs that my jovial Labrador mix might draw unnecessary attention from the HOA. As we strolled through the neighborhood, certain residents gazed warily at us, their eyes narrowing as they looked away, an unsettling feeling that something was brewing beneath their seemingly friendly facade. I shrugged it off at first. Surely it was nothing more than typical neighborly curiosity. That notion quickly shattered when I received that fateful letter from the HOA, prohibiting pets in the community. Suddenly it became clear why some residents reacted dismissively. Max's playful antics and size might have raised concerns for those accustomed to a more controlled environment devoid of canine chaos. While he didn't have a propensity for barking excessively or causing mayhem in public spaces, his very breed might have contributed to some preconceived notions about what dog ownership entailed. After all, Labradors are known for their exuberance. They thrive on companionship and need ample interaction to stay happy and balanced. Max's natural instinct to greet people with unbounded enthusiasm could misinterpret as rowdiness by homeowners adhering to strict interpretations of peaceful living. It made me realize how easy it is for biases against larger dog breeds or any signs of pet ownership to surface in communities like mine, where rules were enforced without consideration for individual circumstance. In hindsight, the very qualities that drew me to Max might have inadvertently painted him as a target in this HOA-driven landscape. His friendly nature often led him to approach others playfully, a trait meant to endear him to everyone but one that might be perceived differently by those wary of dogs in their serene surroundings. This predicament made me reflect on societal views towards pet ownership and breed stereotypes prevalent among various communities. Some residents valued tranquility above all else. Any sign of potential chaos, like a spirited dog, could threaten the meticulous order they cherished. It felt profoundly unjust that Max's lively spirit, once full of promise, would now serve as part of an ongoing conflict born out of regulations rather than reality. The situation forced me into a difficult position, defending my right to own a dog while dismantling misconceptions about what responsible pet ownership truly means. The narrative surrounding Max began shaping not only our lives but also stirred deeper questions regarding the role of HOAs in controlling personal freedoms within community dynamics. As I navigated these challenges, educating myself about responsible dog ownership became imperative, not merely in terms of training techniques, but also understanding how to champion an inclusive atmosphere where spirited companions like Max could coexist harmoniously alongside neighbors. This journey carved out an enlightening pathway toward reclaiming not only my voice, but also advocating for others facing similar encroachments on their rights throughout our shared living space. Rallying alongside fellow residents who valued responsible pet ownership became essential as we sought an equitable balance between regulations and personal freedoms within our HOA-governed lives, a challenge that would ultimately prove both daunting and transformative. The day I first learned about the HOA's dog ban remains etched in my memory, a moment that transformed my life in ways I could never have anticipated. It was a sunny Wednesday afternoon, and I had just returned from a long walk with Max, his tail wagging joyfully as we climbed the steps to our front porch. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and I felt a sense of contentment that only comes from spending quality time with a beloved pet. Little did I know that this blissful moment would soon be shattered. As I stepped inside, I noticed an envelope tucked beneath my doormat. Its crisp edges and official-looking logo immediately caught my eye. My heart began to race as I recognized it as correspondence from the Homeowners Association. I had seen similar envelopes in the mail before, but this one felt particularly ominous. With a sense of foreboding, I tore it open, eager yet apprehensive about what it contained. Inside was a formal letter detailing the HOA's rules and regulations, a document that would prove to be life-altering. My eyes quickly darted to the highlighted section that read, "All dog ownership is strictly prohibited within the community." The words seemed to jump off the page, ringing in my ears as I processed their gravity. The reasons cited for this draconian rule included maintaining cleanliness, ensuring peace among residents, and preserving property values. Each justification felt like an indictment against Max and me, painting us as potential sources of chaos in an otherwise tranquil neighborhood. I couldn't help but feel bewildered and frustrated. I had moved into this community believing it was a place where families and individuals could thrive side by side, not an environment where joy and companionship would be deemed disruptive. As I continued reading, anger bubbled up inside me when I realized that there was no mention of any previous communications regarding this rule prior to my moving in. A glaring oversight on the part of the HOA. Had I known about such a restrictive policy beforehand, it might have influenced my decision to become part of this community. The letter also detailed fines for violations, an escalating scale that began at $150 for a first offense and could reach over $1,200 for repeated infractions within a short time frame. The sheer magnitude of these penalties left me reeling. How could they impose such financial burdens on someone simply trying to enjoy life with their dog? In that moment, I felt both trapped and targeted by an unseen force wielding power over my daily existence. I spent the rest of the evening wrestling with emotions ranging from disbelief to indignation. Max curled up at my feet, seemingly unaware of the turmoil brewing around him. As night fell, I made several attempts to connect with neighbors who might provide insight into how they navigated these regulations or who might share their own experiences with the HOA. What struck me was how few people openly discussed their feelings regarding communal rules. Most seemed resigned or unwilling to challenge authority. By the next morning, discontent morphed into determination. I resolved not only to fight for my right to keep Max, but also to advocate for other residents who might find themselves in similar predicaments without realizing it. While many homeowners accepted the HOA's authority without question, I sensed there were others like me who valued personal freedoms over rigid regulation. It became clear that this ban on dogs would not just affect my relationship with Max, but would also ripple through the fabric of our community dynamics. Would fellow residents rally behind me, or would they choose to uphold the HOA's stringent standards at all costs? These questions consumed my thoughts as I prepared for what lay ahead. The ensuing days were fraught with tension as conversations shifted from casual greetings to hushed whispers whenever Max and I walked by. The hostility simmering beneath the surface was palpable. Some neighbors regarded me with suspicion while others offered sympathetic glances. The atmosphere transformed into one where cohabitation hinged precariously on adherence to HOA regulation. As I began investigating the ins and outs of HOA governance, attending meetings and reaching out to other residents, it became apparent that many were unaware of their rights or how to challenge unjust rules effectively. This journey not only forced me into a position of advocacy for myself, but also opened doors for dialogue about fairness and accountability within our community. In retrospect, that initial letter announcing the ban on dogs marked the beginning of a tumultuous path, filled with confrontation but also possibilities for change. It was not just about fighting for Max, it became a broader struggle against an organization that wielded influence over our lives without sufficient checks on its authority. Armed with newfound knowledge and determination, I prepared to confront my HOA head-on in pursuit of justice, not just for myself, but for every resident who believed in harmony over restriction within our shared living space. As the days turned into a blur of tension and frustration, the reality of the fines imposed by the HOA became increasingly clear. The letter I received not only banned dog ownership in the community, but also laid out a detailed schedule of penalties for infractions, which would quickly escalate beyond what I could have anticipated. The weight of these fines added a financial burden that felt both overwhelming and unjust. The first infraction, as stated in the letter, came with a fine of $150 for allowing Max to roam in our shared community spaces. This initial penalty seemed minor compared to what followed, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. The letter explained that this fine applied even if Max was on a leash or under my supervision, an arbitrary distinction that left me baffled. My heart sank as I realized that simply walking my dog could lead to immediate financial repercussion. If I were to receive a second violation within a span of 30 days, the fine would increase to a staggering $300. This meant that any repeated sightings of Max in public areas, even if I was compliant with all other regulations, would result in hefty penalties that could pile up quickly. How had it come to this? The thought of being penalized for merely trying to enjoy life with my dog filled me with indignation. The third infraction, a mere week after the initial notification, would incur a fine of. At this point, it felt as if the HOA was using escalating fines as a weapon against residents like me, who dared to defy their strict regulation. The letter ominously warned that if I continued to violate the dog ban, subsequent infractions could lead to fines exceeding $1,1200 for repeated offenses within a short time frame. The sheer scale of these penalties struck me as excessive and punitive rather than corrective. Adding insult to injury was the manner in which these fines were communicated. Each notification arrived briskly and formally, devoid of any empathy or understanding for my situation. There was no opportunity for discussion or negotiation, just a cold acknowledgement of authority and compliance through monetary punishment. Each new letter felt like another nail in the coffin of my hope for coexistence within this community. Despite my growing frustration with the HOA's tactics, I found myself determined to combat these unjust fines head-on. I began documenting each correspondence meticulously, compiling evidence not only of my compliance, but also outlining instances where leniency should have been considered given my circumstances, as a new resident unaware of such stringent rules. A part of me wondered if others had faced similar challenges and whether there was an opportunity to rally support from neighbors who might share my concerns about fairness. As I navigated through this process, I spoke with fellow residents about their experiences or lack thereof with the HOA's regulations. To my surprise, many admitted they felt powerless when confronted with HOA rules. Several expressed resentment toward the organization, but had resigned themselves to comply without question due to fear of repercussions or financial strain. This realization fueled my resolve even further. It became apparent that these fines were not just targeting me, but potentially stifling the voices of many homeowners who felt trapped by hyperregulation. The more I delved into discussions about HOA governance and policy enforcement with neighbors, the more I recognized there was an underlying desire for change among those who hadn't yet gathered the courage to speak up. Days turned into weeks as I prepared for an upcoming HOA meeting, where residents could voice their grievances and seek clarification on policies. Armed with newfound knowledge about dog ownership rights and potential legal loopholes regarding community regulations, I aimed to advocate not only for myself, but also for others who may have felt voiceless amid stringent rules governing our neighborhood. When that day finally arrived, anticipation coursed through me as I entered the meeting room filled with fellow residents who appeared equally wary yet ready to engage in discussion about our community's future. It became evident that while some were unwilling to challenge authority directly, many stood behind me silently, hoping someone would take a stand against unjust policies affecting their lives. Standing before them with conviction ignited something within me. It wasn't merely about fighting fine anymore. It had transformed into something much larger, the fight for fairness within our community governance structure and reclaiming our rights as homeowners against an oppressive regime that prioritized rules over relationships and joy over companionship. As I prepared to speak that evening, armed with facts and personal anecdotes alike, I felt more than ready. I felt empowered to challenge not only the fining process itself, but also reshape how we engage with each other as neighbors united by shared values, rather than divided by rigid restrictions on how we choose to live alongside one another. As my conflict with the HOA deepened, it became increasingly essential to clarify my position in relation to the association. Though I was living within the community governed by the HOA, I was not, in fact, a member of it, an oversight that would soon prove pivotal in my ongoing struggle. I had purchased my home directly from the developer, which meant I hadn't officially signed any agreements or acknowledged membership with the HOA. This distinction was not just a technicality. It would become a focal point in my defense against their regulation. Typically, homeowners associations require membership upon purchasing a property within their jurisdiction. This membership usually comes with an obligation to pay regular dues, adhere to certain rules, and participate in governance through voting right. However, when I moved into my home, there was no explicit mention or requirement for me to join the HOA. The developer had presented the homes as part of a managed community without adequately explaining that ownership came with automatic enrollment into the HOA. Initially, this seemed like a blessing. I believed I could enjoy my new life free from bureaucratic constraints. Yet as I received notices from the HOA regarding dog bans and subsequent fines, I quickly learned that being an unofficial resident came with its own challenges and perhaps more significant disadvantages than benefits. The laws and guidelines set forth by the HOA were positioned as mandatory for all residents living in the community, whether they were members or not. When confronted with this reality during discussions with HOA representatives, I found myself bewildered by their rationale. They argued that all residents benefited from shared amenities and common areas maintained by association dues collected from homeowners, hence justifying their authority over me despite my lack of formal membership. It felt paradoxical. How could I be bound by rules that I hadn't actively agreed to? This question loomed heavily over any attempts I made to appeal against the fines for Max's presence in our community. This dynamic left me feeling trapped between two opposing forces: my desire for companionship and freedom for my dog versus an organization wielding authority through financial penalties and rigid enforcement of regulation. It appeared that while some residents openly supported HOA policies desiring order above all else, a growing number of others began expressing sympathy for my plight once they understood the nuances of my situation. Navigating this murky terrain prompted me to seek clarity on several fronts, including legal advice about property ownership rights concerning HOA. In conversations with local attorneys experienced in such matters, it became clear that many people like myself have faced similar dilemmas, situations where housing developers failed to disclose full details regarding HOAs upon sale can lead to unanticipated repercussions later on. In addressing these complexities at our upcoming HOA meeting, I aimed not only to fight for myself, but also serve as a voice for others who may not have realized they too possessed certain defenses against arbitrary regulations imposed without consent or consideration of individual circumstance. Determined to present both evidence and logical arguments supporting my case, alongside personal narratives of what responsible dog ownership looks like, I prepared meticulously in anticipation of standing before the board and fellow residents alike. As word spread about my intention to challenge both fines and certain policies surrounding dog ownership within our community at large, whispers among neighbors turned into conversations filled with ideas about reforming how our HOA functions altogether. I reached out to other residents who were equally disgruntled by various aspects of HOA governance and compliance issues they'd encountered along their journeys as homeowners. Each story uncovered layers of shared frustration over strict enforcement practices that penalized innocent mistakes rather than seeking constructive solutions or fostering rapport among neighbors. On the evening prior to the meeting, as I sat quietly reflecting on everything leading up to this momentous occasion, one thought resonated loudly. Change begins when individuals recognize their collective strength against systemic imposition, especially within environments governed by stringent regulations absent proper checks on power dynamics. The next day would prove vital, not just for myself but for our entire neighborhood enveloped within an often punitive framework masquerading as community governance. Armed with knowledge about both legal standings regarding informal memberships in HOAs and genuine aspirations toward fairness among all residents, I stepped forward ready to confront authority head-on. Not from a place of anger, but rather a commitment toward reclaiming balance within our shared living spaces. What once felt like an isolated battle transformed into something larger: the pursuit of justice rooted in collaboration between neighbors dedicated to living harmoniously alongside one another regardless of rules attempting otherwise. As I navigated the tumultuous waters of confronting the HOA, the reactions from my neighbors varied widely, reflecting a spectrum of perspectives on the issues at hand. Some residents seemed indifferent, perhaps believing that the HOA's rules were necessary for maintaining order and property values in our community. Others expressed outright support for my plight, revealing an undercurrent of dissent against the HOA's rigid regulation. One afternoon, while walking Max, I bumped into Mrs. Thompson, a retired school teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. She greeted us with her usual warmth, but her demeanor shifted when she learned about the fines I was facing. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, shaking her head. "I can't believe they're treating you this way, especially when you're such a responsible pet owner." Her words resonated deeply. They validated my frustrations and reminded me that I wasn't alone in this battle. Miss Thompson shared her own experiences with the HOA, recounting how they had previously imposed fines on her for what she described as minor infractions regarding holiday decoration. "They are more concerned with rules than with people," she lamented, emphasizing that many long-term residents felt similarly stifled by the association's ironclad authority. Her support encouraged me to believe that there were others who might rally around my cause as well. On the other hand, not all reactions were sympathetic. During a brief encounter with a neighbor named Mr. Grant, who prided himself on his strict adherence to all HOA regulations, I sensed open disapproval. He stated flatly that rules were in place for a reason, and that any deviation threatened the integrity of our community. His eyes narrowed suspiciously as he added, "If you want to live here, you should follow the rules like everyone else." It was clear he viewed my situation through a lens of conformity rather than compassion. Mr. Grant's reaction illuminated the divide within our neighborhood, a clash between those who prioritized order and those yearning for flexibility and understanding amidst structured governance. This dichotomy was also evident during informal conversations at community gatherings where residents discussed everything from gardening tips to grievances about ongoing maintenance issues overseen by the HOA. The varying responses became more pronounced as news of my challenge against the HOA spread. Some neighbors began stopping by to express their support, revealing personal stories of frustration with policies that felt overly restrictive or arbitrary. A group of mothers from down the block even approached me one evening while Max played in our yard to voice their concerns about how dog ownership restrictions could negatively impact families seeking companionship through pets. "We're not all looking for chaos," one mother stated passionately. "Some of us have kids who need pets in their lives for emotional support and learning responsibility." It was heartening to see others coming together around common interests and advocating for change as well, reinforcing my belief that I was not just fighting for myself, but also for families like theirs. Yet still, there were whispers of dissent among other residents who quietly sided with Mr. Grant's perspective, emphasizing their desire for quiet streets free from perceived disturbances. These individuals often exchanged furtive glances as I passed by. Their body language spoke volumes about fears surrounding disorder infiltrating our otherwise orderly lives. This mixture of support and opposition made it increasingly clear that approaching the upcoming HOA meeting would require careful consideration of both sides, those wanting enforcement and those advocating flexibility. As I prepared my arguments to present at the meeting, it became vital not only to address my situation but also to highlight broader implications regarding community harmony. Through informal discussions over coffee or while chatting at neighborhood events leading up to the meeting, it became easier to gauge where people stood on various issues related to HOA governance. Consensus began forming around several key points. Many residents expressed a desire for transparency in decision-making processes and proposed avenues for input on contentious rules impacting everyone's quality of life. With each passing day leading up to the meeting, I felt encouraged by these conversations and endowed with renewed determination to fight for a fairer approach within our community framework, one rooted in understanding rather than enforcement alone. Ultimately, it became clear that whether my neighbors supported or opposed my actions against the HOA did not matter as much as fostering open dialogue among all residents moving forward. We needed solutions that respected individual rights while preserving shared interests in maintaining a thriving neighborhood atmosphere. As I reflected on these interactions during quiet moments at home with Max curled up beside me, I embraced this opportunity not just as a confrontation but as an invitation toward collaboration, a chance to unify voices across differing opinions toward creating lasting improvements for everyone. Living within our community boundaries amidst bureaucratic constraints that had too long gone unchallenged. With the stakes rising as I faced fines from the HOA and mounting frustrations surrounding their regulations, I knew that merely voicing my concerns wouldn't suffice. If I wanted to challenge their authority effectively, I needed to take concrete steps toward resolution. This journey led me down a multifaceted path of advocacy, legal consultation, and strategic engagement with both HOA board members and fellow residents. My first proactive step involved attending the next scheduled HOA meeting. Armed with documentation of the fines and regulations alongside Max's veterinary records proving his good behavior, I sought a platform where my voice could be heard. The atmosphere at these meetings was always tense. Residents often sat in silence while board members discussed community management issues without much input from homeowners. However, this time felt different. I was determined to change that dynamic. When the moment came for residents to speak, I took a deep breath and shared my experience, emphasizing how the dog ban disproportionately affected responsible pet owners like myself. As I spoke about my bond with Max and how he had become an essential part of my life during a challenging transition, I noticed nods of understanding from some attendees. Their supportive expressions encouraged me to press on. After addressing my concerns regarding the unfairness of the dog ban and presenting my case for reconsideration of such harsh penalties, I noticed several board members exchanging glances. While they remained largely unresponsive during my speech, a few seemed slightly more open than before, perhaps recognizing the human element behind their policies. Despite this small victory at the meeting, it became clear that further action was needed. Seeking guidance from local attorneys specializing in HOA disputes became my next priority as I aimed to better understand my rights as a homeowner who wasn't officially bound by membership obligation. After a few consultations, I learned that there were indeed possible avenues to contest both the fines and the overarching dog policy through legal channels. The attorney explained that while many HOAs maintain significant control over community governance, state laws often protect property owners from overly punitive regulations, especially when these rules had not been clearly communicated at the time of purchase. With this knowledge in hand, I felt more confident in my ability to push back against any unjust enforcement. As conversations around my situation continued within our community, it became increasingly evident that others were also grappling with dissatisfaction regarding the HOA's governance structure. Many residents approached me after meetings or during casual encounters to share their grievances about different restrictions imposed by the association, an alarming pattern pointing towards systemic issues needing attention. Encouraged by this growing momentum, I organized informal gatherings in nearby parks where fellow residents could come together to discuss our shared interests and concerns about living under such stringent regulations. These gatherings emphasized creating a supportive network among neighbors who desired more inclusivity in community decisions rather than just adhering blindly to top-down mandates from HOA board members. At one such gathering, we brainstormed ideas on how best to approach future discussions with HOA representatives constructively yet assertively. A neighbor named Jessica suggested drafting a petition calling for greater transparency regarding rules affecting pet ownership and other key aspects of community life. This initiative would serve dual purposes. Not only would it formalize our collective concerns, but also present them directly to decision-makers as tangible evidence of resident dissent. With support from neighbors rallying behind this idea, we worked tirelessly over several weeks collecting signatures while simultaneously preparing our case for a special meeting dedicated solely to reviewing existing dog policies within our community. Residents voiced their enthusiasm for engaging in dialogue rather than accepting things as they were. Hope began filling what had previously felt like an uphill battle against an unyielding bureaucracy. On the day of our special meeting with HOA board members, a culmination of all our efforts, I felt an electrifying mix of anxiety and determination coursing through me. Arriving early allowed me time to meet with fellow supporters who understood how critical this moment was not just for myself but for everyone affected by these restrictive policies. During what became an animated discussion between board members and concerned residents alike, voices rose in defense of responsible pet ownership while advocating for necessary changes moving forward, changes rooted in mutual respect rather than fear or conformity alone. Though tensions occasionally flared during debates about individual rights versus collective comfort within our neighborhood dynamics, it was clear that each participant brought valuable perspectives, shaping solutions everyone could agree upon. Solutions designed not only for fairness but also fostering community spirit among all homeowners navigating similar struggles under identical constraints set forth by governing bodies like HOAs across America. Through every conversation threaded together over time, from informal chats in backyards to organized meetings, the sense emerged: we're no longer simply fighting separate battles against oppressive policies. We were forging connections aimed at transforming our neighborhood into a space where compassion coexisted harmoniously alongside governance, aimed at preserving order without sacrificing fundamental freedoms cherished by so many, striving collectively toward positive change. As my efforts to advocate for my rights and those of my neighbors continued, exploring legal options became a critical focus. I knew that merely voicing discontent would not be sufficient if I truly wanted to contest the fines the HOA had imposed or challenge their authority over dog ownership in our community. With every conversation with neighbors, I unearthed more instances of dissatisfaction, and I realized that understanding the legal framework surrounding HOAs was essential for mounting any significant challenge. Consulting with a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes provided invaluable insights into the rights of homeowners and the implications of HOAs on individual freedom. One of the most illuminating aspects of our discussion centered around state laws that govern HOAs, which can vary significantly depending on location. For instance, many states have statutes requiring that rules be clearly communicated to homeowners prior to their occupancy, creating an obligation for transparency. Given that I had not received proper notice regarding the dog ban or the fines, this could potentially serve as a solid legal basis for contesting both the penalties and the ban itself. One case stood out during our discussion: a similar scenario involving another homeowner who was fined for having a pet in violation of their HOA's rules. In that instance, the homeowner successfully argued that the HOA had failed to enforce its regulations uniformly, as several other residents had pets without consequence. This brought to light the concept of selective enforcement, which is often used in legal arguments against HOAs. If I could highlight inconsistencies in how the HOA applied its rules, not just in my situation but through testimonies from other residents, it could bolster my claim that their policies were improperly enforced. Armed with this understanding, I reflected on ways to engage more formally with the HOA board beyond just attending meetings. I began documenting everything meticulously, compiling evidence not only about my personal challenges, but also gathering testimonials from neighbors equally frustrated by the association's governance. Some shared stories of receiving unfair fines for minor infractions or encountered arbitrary enforcement of decorative rules during holiday seasons. This pattern suggested a systemic issue enabling the HOA's authority to go unchecked. The plan was twofold. First, request a personalized meeting with board members to discuss my situation directly and seek clarification on policy enforcement. Second, if necessary, gather enough support to formalize our collective grievances through legal channels. This meant I would need signatures for a petition highlighting our concerns over the dog ban and overall governance structure, alongside additional voices from residents willing to publicly express their frustration. I reached out to neighbors willing to articulate their dissatisfaction not only about pet restrictions, but also about various other issues, including unkept communal areas and ambiguous enforcement policies that plagued our community. Motions began forming as our informal chats evolved into passionate discussions about how we could file requests for alterations to HOA policies involving pets and neighborhood governance practices. Beyond gathering signatures, developing a comprehensive proposal detailing requests for more humane pet ownership regulations represented a critical strategy. We emphasized responsible ownership principles aimed at fostering a more compassionate approach rather than punitive actions, a notion many residents could rally behind as they shared anecdotal evidence supporting how pets enrich family life and mental health. With community support solidifying behind these initiatives, I felt empowered to prepare our case meticulously for presentation during a special meeting. The idea was to create an agenda that provided room for addressing not just the specific issue at hand, but prompting broader conversations regarding potential changes within the HOA framework, favoring resident voices over imposing strict edicts from above. Furthermore, educating myself about relevant community governance precedents proved pivotal as I researched other instances where residents successfully challenged HOA policies across different neighborhoods nationally and even participated in online forums discussing common legal battles waged against such organizations. These shared experiences enabled me to glean strategies on framing arguments effectively while maintaining decorum during discussions. Rounding up all this research and preparation allowed me to enter discussions emphasizing community unity. Rather than simply advocating for my cause based on emotional appeals alone, focus now shifted towards demonstrating tangible paths toward collectively modifying restrictive policies, mandating off-leash bans regardless of established good behavior patterns among pet owners. As we approached this critical meeting, energized residents prepared testimonies outlining varied perspectives demonstrating why compassionate governance mattered and urging change toward greater inclusivity and representation within decision-making processes governing us all. Through every step taken from seeking legal advice to promoting grassroots support throughout our communal space, I recognized an opportunity not only to address unjust fines, but equally cultivate shared values built upon collaboration, striving ultimately toward reclaiming dignity for every resident as wholesome relationships alongside responsible living choices, free from misinterpretations driven entirely by rulebook limitations, hurting families wishing nothing more than happiness fulfilled through loving companionship regardless of different experiences, shared under identical conditions, dictated by external authorities like HOAs ruling our daily lives. The emotional toll of my ongoing conflict with the HOA weighed heavily on me, manifesting in both stress and feelings of injustice. Each letter that arrived detailing fines or reiterating the ban on dog ownership felt like a personal attack, a reminder of how vulnerable I was to an organization that seemed more focused on enforcing rules than understanding the lives impacted by those rules. The relentless nature of the HOA's actions fostered a sense of anxiety that crept into my daily life, making simple activities like walking Max feel fraught with dread. Initially, I thought I could manage the situation with some straightforward advocacy. However, as the fines accumulated and the stakes grew higher, it became clear that this conflict was about more than just my rights as a pet owner. It was about the broader implications of living under an unyielding governance structure. The stress of fighting against what felt like an impenetrable bureaucracy turned my home, a place I had hoped would bring peace and stability, into a battleground. I often found myself lying awake at night, contemplating the impending HOA meetings and what I might say to defend my position. The thoughts swirled in my head like a storm. What if they dismissed my concerns? What if neighbors turned against me? The fear of social isolation loomed large. I worried that standing up for myself might alienate me from those who supported the HOA's strict adherence to rule. Each interaction at community gatherings became tinged with anxiety, as I carefully gauged how my words would be received by those around me. The emotional strain was compounded by moments of doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Would others view my insistence on advocating for Max as selfish or disruptive? These questions haunted me, creating a palpable tension in my interactions with neighbors. While I sought support from some who shared my frustrations, I also encountered individuals who were quick to chastise my stance as a challenge to community order. Their dismissal left me feeling isolated and misunderstood, reinforcing my sense of injustice. As the conflict escalated, I also experienced feelings of anger, not just towards the HOA but towards myself for finding myself in this position in the first place. How had I ended up in a situation where I felt powerless against an organization that should be fostering community rather than dividing it? This anger fueled my determination to fight back, but it also manifested in moments of frustration during discussions with neighbors who chose to uphold the status quo instead of advocating for change. In addition to the emotional turmoil caused by the HOA's actions, I also felt deep sadness over the toll this conflict took on my relationship with Max. The worry and stress blurred the joy he had brought into my life. Instead of enjoying walks through our neighborhood and bonding over shared experiences, I found myself increasingly anxious about his presence and what it might mean for our future together. Max's playful energy seemed at odds with my mounting pressure. I struggled to balance his needs with the constraints imposed by the HOA. Throughout this journey, I often sought solace in conversations with other residents who had faced their own challenges with the HOA, finding comfort in shared experiences. These discussions not only provided emotional support, but also reinforced the notion that I wasn't alone in this struggle. Many expressed their own frustrations about various regulations, from landscaping rules to restrictions on holiday decorations, revealing a common thread of discontent running through our community. As I continued to advocate for both Max and myself, I began to channel my emotional turmoil into constructive action. Every meeting attended, Every discussion initiated and every piece of evidence gathered became a step toward reclaiming not just my rights, but also a sense of agency over my living situation. While moments of doubt and fear persisted, they were increasingly countered by feelings of empowerment as I realized that standing up against injustice could forge connections with others and inspire collective action. Reflecting on this emotional journey, it became evident that while the struggle was exhausting, it was also transformative. The experience forced me to confront not only external challenges, but also internal fears about conflict and vulnerability. In advocating for change within our community, I discovered resilience within myself that had long lain dormant. Ultimately, this conflict with the HOA became more than just a battle over fines and regulations. It evolved into a profound exploration of community values, personal rights, and the importance of compassion in governance. As I prepared for upcoming meetings armed with newfound strength and support from fellow residents, I recognized that while this journey had been fraught with stress and emotion, it had also opened doors to deeper connections and a renewed commitment to fostering understanding and inclusivity in our neighborhood. As I reflected on my experience with the HOA, it became increasingly clear that my struggles were not isolated incidents, but rather part of a broader conversation about the implications of homeowners associations in residential communities. While HOAs are often established to maintain order and aesthetics, they can also lead to significant concerns regarding overreach, lack of transparency, and the balance between homeowner rights and community regulation. One of the most common criticisms of HOAs is their tendency to overreach in enforcing rules that may not align with the needs or desires of all residents. In my case, the dog ban served as a prime example. It felt disproportionate to impose such strict regulations without considering individual circumstances or providing adequate communication about its enforcement. Many residents found themselves feeling like unwitting participants in a game governed by constantly shifting rules that prioritized conformity over personal freedoms. This dynamic fostered an environment where fear of penalties overshadowed the joy of homeownership. The lack of transparency within many HOAs further complicates these issues. Often, decisions are made behind closed doors, leaving homeowners in the dark about how rules are formed or modified. In my discussions with neighbors, it became evident that many were unaware of key policies affecting their lives until they faced fines or restrictions. This lack of communication breeds distrust and resentment among residents who feel they have little say in how their community is governed. In researching state laws governing HOAs, I discovered that many jurisdictions require boards to provide clear documentation regarding rules and regulations to homeowners before they move into a community. However, in practice, this expectation is frequently unmet, leading to situations like mine where residents face sudden enforcement actions without prior knowledge or understanding. Such scenarios raise critical questions about accountability. How can homeowners hold their associations responsible for ensuring fair governance when transparency is lacking? Another fundamental issue arises from the tension between homeowner rights and community regulations. While it is essential for communities to maintain certain standards for aesthetics and safety, there must also be room for flexibility when it comes to individual circumstances. My situation exemplified this conflict. The blanket ban on dogs overlooked responsible pet ownership while disregarding the emotional and social benefits that animals bring to families. Many residents voiced similar frustrations during our discussions about various HOA policies beyond just affecting pet ownership. We shared stories about arbitrary fines for minor infractions like unapproved outdoor decorations or unkempt lawns, issues that felt trivial compared to the larger goal of fostering a welcoming community atmosphere. This common thread linked our experiences together, highlighting a systemic problem within our HOA governance structure. Moreover, as I engaged with fellow residents who had faced similar challenges, it became apparent that many felt powerless against an organization designed to serve them, yet often acted as if it were above them. The feelings of helplessness were palpable. Several individuals expressed fatigue over fighting against rigid regulations that seemed more focused on control than collaboration. In light of these discussions, we began exploring potential solutions aimed at reforming our HOA's governance model. One idea involved creating forums where residents could voice their concerns openly and engage directly with board members on policy issues affecting us all. Establishing regular town hall meetings would encourage dialogue and foster a sense of community ownership over decision-making processes. an essential step toward bridging the divide between residents and the HOA. Furthermore, drafting proposals for changes in existing policies would serve as another avenue for advocating greater inclusivity within our governance structure. By presenting evidence-based arguments supporting responsible pet ownership alongside testimonials from fellow residents who shared similar sentiments about other restrictive measures enforced by the HOA, we could push for reforms grounded in compassion rather than fear. The journey toward addressing these broader implications surrounding our HOA was invigorating, yet daunting. It called upon me not only to advocate for my rights, but also to engage deeply with fellow homeowners committed to cultivating an inclusive environment where diverse voices could be heard without repercussions. Ultimately, my experience reinforced critical insights into navigating community governance structures effectively while ensuring fairness across varying perspectives within neighborhoods governed by stringent regulations set forth by organizations like HOA. We must constantly strive for balance between maintaining communal standards and honoring individual homeowner rights if we hope to foster thriving communities characterized by cooperation rather than division. As I prepared for upcoming meetings equipped with this understanding and collective support from neighbors eager for change, I realized that advocating against injustices imposed by HOAs could create meaningful pathways toward harmonious coexistence, rooted in shared values shaping our lives together, moving forward, ultimately redefining what it means to be part of a community built on respect rather than mere compliance alone. Reflecting on my journey with the HOA, it's clear that this experience has not just been a personal battle, it sheds light on broader issues within homeowner associations that impact countless residents across the country. My conflicts have revealed critical takeaways regarding the implications of HOA governance, particularly concerning overreach, lack of transparency, and the ongoing struggle to balance homeowner rights with community regulation. One of the most significant realizations I've had is that homeowners often find themselves entangled in a web of rules that can feel restrictive and arbitrary. The dog ban I faced exemplifies how such regulations can impose undue hardship, especially when they don't account for responsible ownership or the well-being of residents. Many people in my community shared similar stories about feeling stifled by the HOA's rigid policies, voicing concerns about their inability to effect change within a system seemingly designed to prioritize control over compassion. This experience has also made it abundantly clear how crucial transparency is in effective governance. As homeowners, we should expect clear communication regarding rules and changes that affect our daily lives. The shock of receiving fines without prior acknowledgement of the existing regulations created an environment of distrust and resentment. It's vital for HOAs to maintain open lines of communication with residents, ensuring all parties understand the guidelines and rationale behind them, especially when community harmony depends on collaboration instead of mere compliance. Moreover, navigating this conflict highlighted the tension between individual freedoms and collective standards that defines many relationships with HOAs. While it's understandable that an organization seeks to maintain specific aesthetics and safety standards within a neighborhood, it must allow for flexibility and consideration of unique circumstances. Our dogs are more than just pets. They enhance our emotional well-being and contribute to family dynamics. Policies should reflect an understanding of responsible pet ownership rather than blanket bans that overlook these benefits. It should also be noted that every resident must be aware of their rights regarding HOA governance. Many people, including myself, prior to this conflict, may be unaware of state laws that protect homeowners from unjust enforcement practices. Exploring these rights is essential not only for those currently in conflict with their associations, but also for anyone considering purchasing property governed by a homeowners association. Through my engagement with legal experts and fellow residents, I discovered how important it is for homeowners to unite and advocate for changes collectively. Conversations with neighbors revealed shared frustrations and concerns about various HOA policies beyond just those affecting pet ownership. This solidarity created a platform for us to voice collective grievances while identifying potential pathways toward reform. With the situation evolving into a broader community movement rather than merely my battle against the HOA, the emotional strain became transformed into empowerment as we worked together to create proposals aimed at fostering inclusivity in decision-making process. By emphasizing compassion and understanding, we were able to reshape the narrative surrounding our needs as residents striving to create a balanced coexistence with our governing bodies. as I encourage readers to reflect on their own relationships with HOAs and policies affecting animal ownership or any other aspect of community living. I emphasize three critical points. Know your rights, engage openly with neighbors and board members alike, and advocate for change if policies do not serve everyone equitably. If you find yourself facing fines or restrictions, do not hesitate to seek advice or advocate for your beliefs. There is power in numbers when seeking reform within HOA governance. Initiating dialogue might appear intimidating initially, but expressing diverse perspectives can lead to meaningful transformations in community regulations. Ultimately, my journey has served as a reminder that when we advocate against injustice, whether related to pet ownership or any other facet of community life, we peel back the layers surrounding flawed systems and drive conversations toward more equitable solutions. Together, we can foster communities built on respect, ones where individuals thrive alongside shared environmental values rather than succumbing under heavy-handed regulation. Embracing this experience has not only fueled my resolve, but strengthens my belief in the importance of asking how we can improve communal living without sacrificing individual liberty. We owe it to ourselves and our fellow neighbors to build spaces where harmony thrives alongside personal values, ultimately contributing to enriched lives within our communities characterized by kindness and understanding towards one another.